Today, we're going to talk about how to create safety in relationships. Now, safety is important for feeling relaxed, feeling connected, feeling intelligent and inspired and turned on by life. And today, we're going to talk to the master himself on creating safety and being wired for love.
Welcome to Thriving Launch with Louise Congdon and Kamala Chambers, the show for heart-centered entrepreneurs who want it all.
5 days a week, we bring you different segments to inspire you to live a life of freedom. We interview the leading experts in the field of business, health, and love. Be sure to check out Training Tuesdays, where we give you a clear action plan to grow your own business.
How would you like to be able to interview world-class experts, sit down and have chats with people like Jack Canfield, Marianne Williamson, Robert Kiyosaki, Tim Ferriss, you name it? Would you love to interview other people that you really admire and consider to be your heroes? Well, we've created a course for you that teaches you how to podcast, how to set it all up, and how to get going so that you can really have a successful show and you can do it properly. Over at thrivinglaunch.com, we have a podcasting course, and it's there for you, waiting for you to snatch it up. So head on over to thrivinglaunch.com and let me teach you how to podcast the right way. Today's guest, Stan Tatkin, PhD, is someone who I truly admire. His book, Wired for Love, really had a big impact on me and really made me want to make some key changes and decisions to have a more thriving relationship, have more success in my love life, and be a more committed and healthy partner, the kind of partner that supports my other half and having a better life and supports her in feeling safe, feeling awesome, and having ultimately the kind of relationship where both of us feel totally in love, nurtured, and supported to go on into our future, to move together, and to really be united. So on today's show, we're bringing on Dr. Stan Tatkin. Welcome to Thriving Launch. We've got Stan on the show. Stan Tatkin, real pleasure to have you here. I'm a big fan of your work. Are you ready to launch?
I sure am.
So your book, Wired for Love, really impacted me. Kamala and I, we consistently have this conversation about, are we wiring each other for love and safety? Are we creating a nervous system? And are we impacting each other's nervous system in a way that we feel safe and loved by each other? I really want to dive into this with you because a lot of people don't think about, they think about giving each other love and it becomes a very psychological thing. But there's a whole nervous wiring that happens that even though I might be giving love, if I haven't wired my partner for love and really worked on the nervous system as well so that they feel safe, it's very hard to create that connection. Can you tell me a little bit about that or start this conversation with us?
Well, we could say that at the bottom of most trouble that relationships encounter is the matter of threat. And here I'm not talking about big T threat, the abusive relationships where there's physical abuse. I'm talking about small T threat, which is what we all deal with day in and day out as we sort of bump into each other and we fight. So how people fight, what they do in sort of the trenches together in terms of making each other feel absolutely unequivocally safe and secure, that is really key, I think. There's other things like being able to co-generate excitement, exciting love and quiet love. All of those things are very important. But if a couple can't be safe, a couple can't manage or co-manage distress in a way that foreshortens it and attenuates it, dampens it down and takes it off the table, then their relationship will eventually, I think, be in trouble because that is a huge part of our human nature, is sweeping the environment for threat and responding to threat. And here, I mean, the faces, voices, movements, gestures, postures, and dangerous words and phrases. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And there's such a unwinding that needs to happen, a process that people need to go through to even feel safe a lot of times when they even enter a relationship. I'd love to hear from you. What are some ways that we can respond to our partner? What are some ways that really help the other person to feel safe?
Well, first of all, I have to mention that when we come into a relationship and we start to feel committed to another person, a memory system gets activated. And this memory system, we call it procedural memory. It contains every experience, particularly, positive, negative experiences, emotional experiences we've had with anybody that we depended on, going all the way back to our earliest relationship, our mother. And so those unresolved experiences related to dependency will come to the fore as soon as we commit to another person. And so we're not just dealing with that relationship, that particular person, we're dealing with everybody that came before. And that goes in both directions. If people don't understand that this is natural, that this is supposed to happen, then they could run into trouble. For instance, I'm not your mother, don't project on me. Well, but the thing is, these relationships are almost totally projective, especially in the beginning. And who else are you going to project onto except for the person who is here and now? So that's a normal thing, but a lot of people have trouble with the idea that they're bringing in memories from past experiences into their relationship, and that is going to come up as soon as people start to depend on each other. That's one. The other is this matter of being fully in. And we know that relationships where one person or both people are not fully in, those relationships are by definition more threatening, because we want to eventually feel that we can take certain things off the table that are resource draining, such as, will this relationship exist tomorrow? And, after a certain time, a period of time, let's say a year, maybe 2 years tops, that should be taken off the table or people should break up. So let's say it's not taken off the table and they're not breaking up. This idea that there is sort of an underlying threat to the relationship continuing because one or both people, when they get into a fight, say something like, I don't know if I can do this anymore, or I don't know if I love you, or I'm not so sure about you yet. And this causes a lot of damage and a lot of unsettling on a day-to-day basis. We know from studying babies and children that when the relationship itself is insecure, in other words, whether the baby can't depend fully on this caregiver or caregivers, their attention goes out the window. Their ability to focus and concentrate and even balance their body is impaired or compromised. And it wreaks havoc on the health of the body, right? So people have to understand that there is a safety and a freedom to strapping yourself in for the ride and committing and going all in, putting all your money on this other person that you're going to pair bond with. And it's hard for many people because I think some folks, depending on their background, they think that if I fully go all in, I'm trapped and I'll lose my freedom, I'll lose my independence, I'll lose my stuff. And it's actually the opposite, that when we fully go all in, not just with another person, but with a career, with anything, there's freedom. That's when we begin to be ourselves within the confines of the agreement that we've made, the commitment that we've made. And there's a tremendous amount of resources that are released as a result of this. But the opposite is true. If people are not fully in, if they don't strap themselves completely in for the ride, they will be afraid to fight because anything they do can and probably will trigger some kind of threat to the relationship, right? They're basically hobbling themselves and creating a stressful situation that being in a relationship is supposed to actually resolve, if that makes sense. So one of the biggest problems going into a relationship is the matter of really fully being all in. And unfortunately, a lot of people that I see in my practice, whether it's 3 years or 30 years, oftentimes there's one person who's wavering still.
And it's interesting for me thinking back on my work with 300 plus married couples and noticing what a difference it makes when I could tell that both the couples were really fully invested in the relationship, or where one person wasn't as in as the other and the other
Right.
person was asking for this thing, and a lot of times what I saw was women wanted the man to marry them, and it hurt them like crazy that the man didn't want to commit to that level.
Yes. Or committed to it and then later said, I wasn't that sure, or I was sort of forced into it. People do a lot of things that raise profound doubt in the other person, and that creates a very, very bad situation where people are found to be auditioning for too long, where they're constantly under this threat that the relationship may not exist tomorrow. And what people don't understand is that nobody acts normal under those conditions. When people are worried about the foundation, the ground that they stand on, that it's not stable, they act very strangely. And if somebody's wanting their partner to perform better, that would not be the way to do it. We only do really well when we're believed in, when our partner puts everything onto us in a good way. In other words, puts all their money onto us and ensures that we feel great about ourselves. That's what we do for each other. We make each other feel great about each other. We lift each other up. We're the best thing since sliced turkey. And if we didn't do that, if we don't do that, if I look at you and say, I'm not so sure about you, you underperform for me. And so nothing about it makes sense. It's one of the most self-harming things that people can do in a relationship is to throw doubt as to whether the relationship should exist.
So then what is the way that we show that commitment? And not everybody's into marriage, but is that the answer for you? Or is it that somehow we make this statement? Do we make this gesture very publicly? I mean, how do we get this across that we're fully in your opinion, what's the best way to signal that to our partner?
By being available to say it and to express it and show it whenever necessary. I will never leave you. I may be angry with you. I may want to wring your neck, but I'm not leaving and you're not leaving. We're going to do this. There are things that both partners have to do because they're stewards of this couple bubble that they're creating, this third entity, the relationship that provides them shelter, that provides them resources, that allows them, this third thing that they're creating, to be unafraid in the world. And it starts with being unafraid at home. If a couple is afraid at home, then it kind of ruins the whole idea of being coupled. What do you need that for? You could hire someone to do most things that another partner does. But the really important things, the quid pro quo, let's say in a relationship, is that you and I are willing to do things for each other that nobody is willing to do for us, even if paid, because it takes too much time, it takes too much effort. For instance, that I have to know you better than I know myself, even, that I become a Luis whisperer and you become a Stan whisperer.
Colin was
right?
pretty good at that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And you want it to go in both directions, because if you look at this in a realistic way, the two of you are creating an agreement, a bond, a union to survive the world, basically to take care of each other, to have each other's backs, because we assume that only the two of you are really going to care that much. Other people care, but not that much.
This is kind of why I like to rush past, or I don't trust the honeymoon phase of a relationship, because you don't really know the person and there's no opportunity to be a Luis whisperer when I don't know what the clearing of his throat means, or all of those little subtle things.
I just cleared my throat.
Watch out, Stan. She's on to you.
Yeah. Your suggestion, I'm so suggestible. You said that and I had to clear my throat.
I don't know, Kamala. I think you were pretty good at whispering, getting me to do what you wanted from the get-go. Nat, you just become even better.
Yes. She whispers, "Get your ass out of bed."
I whispered, "Quit your job and come travel the world with me," and he did, which was so great.
Hard to resist that one, isn't it,
That's hard to resist that one, yeah.
So we're talking about creating safety in this relationship, and I want to recap a few of the things that you said and add some of my own insights into it as well. After working with so many couples, I noticed this habit that couples had around, I'm going to leave. We're not going to be together, or that's it. It's over. I don't know about this anymore. And I noticed how much that hurt. And in talking to couples that have been married 30, 40, 50 plus years, one of the commonalities that I started to notice among these successful couples, and when I measure success, I'm not just measuring time, I'm measuring happiness, satisfaction, dreams, shared dreams together, level of communication. There's this whole thing that goes into it. It's not just time, but time is also a great factor when you also include happiness and this shared joy together. And one of the things that I noticed is that these couples said at some point we had to commit to where no one is leaving. We are in it. And once we made that decision, it created a lot of safety, and we didn't ever go and say we're going to leave. That wasn't a word that we used. And I noticed that consistently among really successful couples.
Yes, and some of those successful couples learn by, putting their hand on the stove.
I've had to learn many times.
Right. And so many of my successful couples actually did do that at some point. And then they knew, without being in therapy, they knew to stop it, to not do that. So it is a major issue. And I think it comes from people's backgrounds. I've talked a lot about insecurity and people coming from insecure attachment cultures where relationships didn't come first. And it's really those people with that history that are more gun shy than others, that are more hesitant about commitment, that are more fearful about dependency, and are more likely to do things like threaten the relationship. So I think people who understand a secure functioning from the get-go, which means that they're engaged in a system that's fully mutual and collaborative, and they're committed to maintaining a safe and secure environment, they tend to know better not to do that because they have an idea that that's not going to work out for them very well. But it's the people who have been hurt in the past, people who are afraid that if I depend on somebody, and this is not a conscious thought, this is experienced in the body, if I depend on somebody, something is going to happen again that is so life-threatening to me that I have to do something to protect myself. And this is when there's a lot of trouble, all right? People who are insecure on the clinging side, clinging, afraid of abandonment, do a lot of pushing and pulling away, pulling toward and pushing away. And their ambivalence comes up when they start to feel good, right? They start to feel good and their body, their memory tells them another shoe's about to drop. And so they sort of foreclose on that happening to them by doing it and pushing their partner away. People on the distancing side will be so afraid of having their independence and autonomy being stolen, including their stuff, by the way. They have their things, they're worried about their things being taken, that they do a lot of distancing, a lot of pushing away. But both sides are equally good at threatening the relationship, threatening the end of the relationship. And sometimes we have to settle these people down and teach them how to work with each other in order to start to feel safer.
It's so scary to hear myself being explained in kind of my shadow side. But as you speak, I really acknowledge that I'm somebody that is afraid of having some of my autonomy taken. Used to be way more afraid of it until Kamala came in and whispered, "Come here, join me." And then I noticed too that one of the things is I'm very attached to my things. I'm very adamant about some things being mine. And through the process of being in a relationship, I've learned to be a lot more in community, a lot more connected to Kamala and willing to be influenced, willing to let her make decisions or let her, kind of lead. Whereas that's not something that's completely easy for me, but it's a healthy practice. And learning how to say, this isn't mine anymore, this is ours, and we get to share it. And that's been quite a process for me. But I know that as I've done that, it's really helped my own maturity. There's this aspect of relationships, and I'd love to hear a little bit of it from you, that we come in with these aspects of ourselves that are underdeveloped, somehow through childhood, we didn't develop them, or something happened where we were constricted in some area. We meet a partner who seems to be more developed in that area. And it seems like that's where the power struggle begins, is our partner really wants us to become more, in some ways, like them. And it can actually be a healthy practice for us to kind of bring that out.
Right. Before I answer your question, I feel the same way about my wife, Tracy. I mean, I was much, much more of an island before I met her. And she brought me in much further into the secure area. So I think this happens with us. We find somebody who's not terribly far away from where we are. Someone who's massively insecure is not unlikely to meet somebody or to be met with someone who is really dead center secure. But we get somebody who's closer to it than we are, and we can be pulled into secure functioning by that person. Also, it must be said, too, that the opposite can happen, that we can be pulled out of it as well by somebody who's more dominant in the relationship and is more insecure. That can happen as well. We generally call that a folie à deux in some sense, where the stronger person is the one who's more unstable and can pull both partners into that. But generally speaking, it can go either way. And of course, we much prefer the ones the way that we're talking about, which is being pulled more into security with our partner.
I want to touch on something that you said earlier, and Kamala, feel free to jump in if you have something. This is my I get so excited talking to Stan. Please.
I do have something, but go ahead, Luis.
Okay. So one of the things that you were talking about is the development of self and how there's a child, in a sense, that we're healing through the relationship. And I've jokingly said to people that a relationship is the best therapy session you will ever have, is the most in-depth one. Yes. And I really believe that. There's so much healing that happens. But as you were talking about the child and developing the child and nurturing the child and how the relationship is a place to come home to for this child to be healed and even grow up, very much like Harville Hendrix said in our interview with him as well.
Yeah.
Really the same. I just love this. And Dr. Susan Johnson really came to mind for me around her attachment therapy and how there is some attachment therapy that we kind of have to do with our partner. I'd love to hear a little bit about that with you, or how some of the ways that we can create that safety and begin wiring our partner so that we're going back to the same thing, but I wanted to bring it more in that kind of childhood conversation.
Well, there's lots of ways. I mean, Harville's a friend, and I'm very familiar with Imago and his idea that one of the purposes of relationships is to heal each other. And I agree with that. I agree that that's one of the reasons that we could think about a relationship, right? And Sue and I agree. In fact, I think all three of us agree we're part of a relationships first group. But my view is even a little bit more basic. And that is, there's a biological need to pair bond, not just to protect offspring, but to protect the pair. We see this in many mammals, not all, but many mammals, that they'll pair bond as a way to protect each other from the environment, from predators. And I think it gets more down to the nitty-gritty of what is our nature and why do this thing, other than we have a biological need for love. We need for sexual intimacy, all of that. But we also need to be safe. And when you look at people who do this really well, they form this couple bubble. They're in the foxhole together. They protect each other. And it's not so much about healing childhoods. It's not about whether they have found their soulmate. It's not about whether they're still attracted to each other or sexually turned on to each other. It's much more fundamental than that. So we see street people, many of which are mentally ill. And as crazy as they are to the outside world, when you watch many of these couples that are homeless, they're doing secure functioning. They know everything about each other. They understand each other. They take each other as they are. They know how to protect each other. They have each other's backs. They would die for each other. We see this with Navy SEALs, although the system demands that they have that kind of ethic, that kind of vision, that your life is not so important. Your partner's life, your buddy's lives, right? They're important. And everyone is protecting each other. I put my life at stake because I can't bear to see you be hurt in the battlefield. We see that with cop car partners, the union that they create, the them and us, because they have to survive together in the environment. And so I think culturally we need something that's grounding like that, that what we're talking about, you and I, about a secure functioning relationship is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's there for us to be able to survive. It just so happens it also, if it's done right, helps us to thrive and become more developed, better people, better citizens, more creative, more productive, more successful, better parents, right? It does that too. But we must also remember that we pair bond to survive the environment and to survive time, because we're moving through time together. And there are all these things coming down the road that we don't even know, but we know not all of them are great. Do we have a partner? Do we have somebody that we can depend on, that we can navigate through those times as a way to feel tethered, to feel connected, to feel safer in the world? And that's kind of lost. There's no message in our culture that's really driving that home to people. And that's what we're trying to do, but it's an uphill battle.
One thing that I think is so powerful about what you're saying is just really driving home the importance of safety, the importance of togetherness, and a sense of building those mini communities, even between a couple or between a group of police officers. And one thing that I see a lot is we go out into the world and our nervous systems get hijacked, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stimulation, even like traffic or drinking too much coffee or just feeling stressed out by a job. And then if we have a time to reset by connecting in with our partner and feeling safe there, then we can just, our baseline is so much more powerful. We have that opportunity to come back to homeostasis. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that process from you.
Well, I think it's true. We live in a very addictive time. And when I say addictive, there's the 24-hour news cycle. There's electronics. There was a time when I've always been big on electronics, and I was always the first adopter. There's no way I could be a first adopter today. I mean, everything is changing so quickly. There's so many shiny objects to look at and to get excited about. There's so many distractions that I think it is very hard for people to find each other and stay there for a time without getting distracted. That's a problem, I think, for me, for Tracy, for everybody right now. But it's true that if we don't set aside time, and even time to just gaze in each other's eyes, I mean, we're not talking about, spending hours of having deep talks about our relationship. That shouldn't happen anyway. But that we're using each other to resource ourselves, to regenerate, to be present. There's nothing like looking into the eyes of another person and to force yourself to be very present. It's about as real time as we can get. Because the brain, actually, there's a lag time. Our sense of real time isn't really real time. There's a delay, but it's as close as we can get. And also because the eyes is so fundamental to falling in love. This is where we fall in love, is through the eyes, through the face, that people are depriving themselves of a regenerating of a kind of feeling of love and sometimes infatuation by just spending time face to face, eye to eye. And skin to skin, too. But skin to skin alone is not the thing. There are a lot of people who do that, but they don't connect. We're talking about the eyes and just being together or creating novelty together, right? The brain loves novelty. And of course, we can't have that in our partner because that ship sailed after we automated them, right? They're novel in the beginning, and then our brain automates everything that's new and makes it old. So that can happen. But with the way we stir up novelty is by doing novel things together. You and Luis were talking about traveling the world. Through third things that we co-create, we can constantly regenerate that feeling of exciting love, which by the way is the addictive kind, the dopaminergic kind, by just understanding the nature of relationship and understanding how we can co-generate these states. We can do a lot with relationship in terms of changing our inner state, but again, most people don't know that. A lot of people are afraid of that. A lot of people don't trust that, and so they go to their own devices as a way to change their internal state. Video games, pornography, drugs, alcohol, whatever, work, right? These things were intended to happen in a relationship, but people have become so fractured and the culture has become so alive with distraction that I think it's a hard sell for people. But if people would just do it and try it, they'd understand, I think, what we're talking about.
Stan, what you're talking about really resonates for me, and it's really beautiful. We've actually brought on Dr. Aaron on the Thriving Launch podcast, where we talked about some of the research, and he was one of the first people to do research on novelty and finding that was one of the keys to marital success and longevity, and researching and how when couples that have been together for a long time, when they do new novel activities together, their brain starts to fire off these neurons. This is for the audience here. I know you know this stuff, Stan, but what happens when you do new novel activities with your partner is these neurons in your brain that used to fire when you first fell in love fire off again. Now, in our discussion with Dr. Helen Fisher, who's also a guest at the Thriving Launch podcast.
She's another dear friend I love. Both Tracy and I love.
So Helen. Beautiful. We had an opportunity to listen to her speak and meet her in New York. And one of the things that she talks about is novel doesn't have to be this crazy thing. It doesn't have to be this out there thing. Novelty can be walking through a different area of your neighborhood,
of course,
going to the theater together if you've never done that, like going and watching plays, or just doing something different and switching things up a little bit so that the brain kind of shuts off this automation part and you get a chance to explore and see your partner and yourself in this new dynamic or new setting.
This is what you're saying is extremely important. There are a lot of people out there who take this idea of novelty and they take it into their own worldview. And what they're doing is some people are actually taking this idea of novelty, and what they're doing is instead of jointly attending to something new, they're doing parallel play. So parallel play is where you're both maybe in the same room, you're maybe even doing the same activity, but you're not using it as a way to jointly attend to it to create an amplification effect between these two brains, right? We're just basically drooling in our own worlds on our separate tracks. And that's not what we're talking about here. Or they're doing something that we call autoregulatory. Autoregulation is a strategy of self-care, but it's strictly restricted to self-stimulation and self-soothing. No person really required. You've heard no boundaries required, no person required. And that's not what we're talking about either. We're talking about two people using the environment to amplify each other and not just simply themselves, right? Because you get much more dopamine. You get much more of a surge when you're using it together than you do if you use it alone. And it amazes me how many people don't know this. I'll talk to couples and they'll go on these romantic trips. And I ask them, when you look at, at this Eiffel Tower, whatever it is you were looking at, did it make so you looked at each other, right? You looked at each other and you said, oh God, I'm so in love with you. I'm so happy I'm with you. You did that, right? No, they don't. It doesn't occur to them to do this. They're on their own separate tracks, enjoying this thing, and they're not using it at all for the relationship. I think some of this is what you see in your family of origin, and some of this has to be learned. Here's another example, by the way, Luis. We don't have a term for this yet, but let's say I am personally excited about something. Let's say my new computer arrived, and I'm so excited about everything it does. If I called Tracy and said, "Oh, honey, you got to see what my computer's doing," that's a problem because I'm asking her to basically externally regulate me. I'm asking her to come to see my computer. It's not for her. It's just for me. But if I were to use that excitement and I feel so excited about my new computer and I call her up and I just use that excitement in a way that she can use it, honey, I love you so much. You're the best, or I'm so proud of you, whatever it is. But I'm using that personal excitement to throw it to her in a way that we both can use and amplify. That's another trick that I think most people don't understand. The use of personal excitement or personal relief and using those moments to throw that to your partner for that mutual amplification effect where we both get high, not just one person. You understand? I kind of liken it to, my going, if I were a hunter and gatherer, I'd go out and I'd leave my family and I'd come back every day fatter than the next. And I'd say, I got nothing, That's because I'm eating everything out there and I don't bring it back to home for us to share. It's kind of the same thing. So there's all these ways that people could be using novelty. And here's another thing. People complain many times that they don't have anything in common anymore, as if
that's a big one. That is one that I hear a lot.
As if that's supposed to stay. You and I are supposed to have the same interests, Kamala, and we're supposed to want to do the same things at the same time. No, that's in courtship. After that, we're two separate brains. The chances of us wanting to do the same thing at the same time are about what? Nil. But it's amazing to me still that people don't understand that they can co-create at any time by starting something new. Instead of bringing you into my tennis game, we take a cooking class together. We do something that neither of us know anything about. And that's how we, again, get back on track and use a third thing to amplify each other. Something exciting, something novel. And there's only a million of those things out there, right? So, it's not hard to find something we both could learn to do that we both don't know how to do. So anyway.
Well, it's been so amazing to have you on the show. before we close out, is there any last pearl of wisdom that you just want to drop? You're welcome to.
I hope I wasn't yammering on too long.
No, it was, the whole thing was pearls of wisdom, but I'm just wondering before we close out if there's a last thought that you want to leave the audience with.
I wish that we could launch some kind of messaging, especially now, in terms of how to really do relationships. The world needs it. We need it right now in terms of learning how to get along with people, learning how to influence people, learning how to use attraction to get what we want, not fear, threat, or guilt, learning how to work collaboratively, somehow to battle the message that's been out there, it's still out there. You got to do this on your own. You got to love yourself before you can love another. You have to be self-made. You don't need anybody else. We have a lot of work to do to change the messaging in our culture. And it's the messaging, I think, that's causing a lot of trouble for us. So if people are inspired by what we're talking about, inspire other people about this idea of secure functioning, being in the foxhole together.
I really love that.
Beautiful. We've been here with Stan Tatkin on Thriving Launch, and we are going to make sure that you can connect with Stan and please get his book. It's fantastic. And everything that Stan's putting out is really incredible to take this even deeper. So we'll make sure to include all of that at thrivinglaunch.com and how to connect with Stan. Thank you so much
for coming on the show, Stan.
May I say one more thing? Is it okay?
Please.
Yeah.
We have PACT Institute. PACT Institute is the approach I'm talking about. We train therapists all over the world and certainly throughout the country. If people are interested, those who are mental health professionals and want to learn a psychobiological approach to couple therapy, then go to thepactinstitute.com, thepactinstitute.com, and there you'll also find out about our couples retreats as well.
Wonderful. That's fantastic, Stan. And whether or not you wrote down that URL, if you're interested in any Stan's work, you want to read the full transcription of this episode, want some resources to make your love more thriving, check us out at thrivinglaunch.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.
You've been listening to the Thriving Launch podcast. For books and resources related to today's episode, make sure to head over to thrivinglaunch.com. We'll see you there.
He was in prison for over 10 years, came out as a convicted felon, and had to find a way to recreate his life and find a way to make money. Mike Pashota has an inspirational story that really teaches us how to free ourselves from our own minds and the surroundings that don't always support our success. Mike has also built a multi-million-dollar brand, and he's going to teach us how he did it and how that mindset can work for you too.